Hello, everyone, and welcome to How to Secure Your Azure SQL Data. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited, truly excited to be your moderator for this special event today. But before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items you need to know about that'll help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you. So we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we will discuss in greater detail some of the top questions you ask. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues, so that's the first thing to do if things go sideways on you. If that doesn't work, let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance right away. All right, next, in the handouts section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we have a number of really important resources for you to check out. Especially today, I want to call your attention to 4 different handouts from Rubrik. That's just really a treasure trove. 4 different handouts, lots of great information. So I encourage you to look those over now and download them during the session. So other resources you'll find in the handouts section include a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's vast library of printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link there to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events, probably a number of them that you'll be interested in. So make sure you check that out and sign up if you find something that really intrigues you. All right, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handouts section. And finally, one of the really top reasons for coming to an Actual Tech Media event is the opportunity to ask a question of our presenters, and we've got some great ones today. So to help encourage those questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event's over, we'll look at all the questions that come in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So with that, let's get to today's fantastic content now that we got all the boring stuff out of the way. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. David Klee, CEO of Heraflux Technologies, Chris Luna, Database Solutions Architect with Rubrik, and Kalyan Aquila, Principal Software Engineer with Rubrik. Looks like they're all on with me right now. So I want to welcome all of you. And David, I want to turn the floor over to you now.
All right. Thank you very, very much. We are going to have a lot of fun. Call me a nerd, call me a dork, whatever you want to say, but I thoroughly enjoy this topic. We're going to talk about, if you're a career DBA, what's the biggest thing that you need to do as part of your job? It's how to secure your data. And we're really focusing in on the Microsoft Azure platform today. So this is a lot of deep dives around how to actually protect your data, which is arguably the most important thing in your business. We're going to talk about Azure SQL backup challenges and requirements, talk more about the details on what the Azure SQL data platform really gives you. We're going to talk about design techniques for advanced data protection. Then we're going to do a quick demo. And then we're going to field your questions, and quite literally anything goes. So if you haven't seen me present before, my name is David Klee. I'm the founder of Heraflux Technologies. We have a lot of fun with playing with some really big toys every day. I'm lucky enough to be a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a VMware vExpert. If you have any questions, again, contact me, heraflux.com, davidklee.net, however you want to get in touch with me. I love playing with big toys, and I love nerding out. So any question goes. Okay. So we've all been in IT long enough. We don't need to make anything up. This is quite honestly my worst case scenario for an organization that we work with that came true last year. 100% factual. I don't need to make any of this stuff up. Quite literally, the day before the United States Thanksgiving holiday last year, November 23rd, 4:15 in the afternoon, you know what happens. We get the inevitable email. We've been hit by ransomware. Everything's gone, including the database that literally powers the entire business. We need your help. So scrap all the plans for the holidays, because guess what? Here's the situation. Apparently, ransomware attackers had been in their environment for over a month, mapping out and scoping out everything. They got a copy of all the critical database backups, and then they deleted everything on disk in one coordinated attack because they assumed that everybody would have been gone for the holiday. Any spot that they deleted anything from, they overwrote the file system with zeros to remove any ability to try to recover it. Everything else, including the operating systems, they encrypted. This company, unfortunately, had no offsite backups. It was the standard thing. We're working on it. We'll get there. We'll do it soon. They hadn't gotten around to it yet. These things happen, and we got to protect for it. And it's not just the bad guys. Natural disasters. I mean, take a look at the photo that I took from my back patio a while back. Tornadoes. I live in Tornado Alley. If you throw a dart in the United States, I'm right in the middle. Tornadoes hit. There's man-made disasters, such as the train derailment in Ohio and the oil spills and all this stuff. You can have a cloud outage. You can have data center outage. Even minor things, they're seemingly minor. Operating system patches, software upgrade failures. You can have storage corruption. And it can be as big as a tornado took out our entire headquarters. It can be as minor as a cable went out. But all of these things add up. They all really act up. And it can even be something minor and innocent. For me, as being a database professional, let's say somebody asks me to remove something from a production system, and I say I need to delete something from this important table where that specific ID equals something, and then I'm hurrying and I select the top line and forget the where clause. Wah, wah, wah. Guess what? Game over. I just removed everything from that table. How are you going to get it back? So bottom line, throw away the technology. And I'm going to ask you all very clearly, do you have your SLAs for your data recoverability defined by the C-level in your organization? Because if you don't, you're guessing, and that guess is never accurate when it's time for something to actually be recovered. So you need two things. You need your recovery point objective. And in layman's terms, it's how much data can we lose and still tolerate the loss. And it can be as little as 0. It can be as much as a day. It all depends on your organization and your requirements. The other one, the recovery time objective, or RTO. What is the maximum tolerable outage that this system can entail? If you don't have these defined by your organization, both for planned and unplanned events, you can't begin to plan your data protection strategy. So if you get nothing else out of this webinar, if you don't have these clearly defined, when we're done with this presentation today, start the conversation inside your organization. You need these clearly defined before you can start designing anything. So your recovery options get interesting. And you can see on the screen here, here's yet another storm photo from where I live. This one just from a couple of years ago. When you're in the Microsoft Azure SQL space, it encompasses a lot of different technologies, and we have to treat them differently. So you can be as localized as a database as a service. So on the Azure platform, it's the Azure SQL database stack, and it works great if that's what you need. There's the platform as a service, and I love all the buzzwords, but it's basically this Azure SQL managed instance. There's also IaaS, or the virtual machine. You got to treat these a little bit differently if you're doing native backups with this stuff. But do you really have to? You don't always have to treat them separately. Now, regardless of the platform, it's the same SQL Server engine under the hood. So from a DBA perspective, what do we have to worry about? You can't just take a backup and call it good. You have to deal with the nuances of SQL Server. So let's just take this average SQL Server environment, on-prem, wherever, doesn't matter. Take a database. I do a database backup. Now, there's this thing called the transaction log that comes across with this. What it is essentially is a ledger of all the data that has changed since the last time you took a backup. So at 12:05, let's say I'm as neurotic as I always am with backups. We're going to do a transaction log backup every 5 minutes. What this means is I've just backed up what changed since the last full backup. So do it again. Do it again. Next night at midnight, kick off a full backup again. This method of backup gives you the ability to recover this data to any point in time in between that last full backup and every forward change, not just at that 5-minute mark. And that's a lot of fun. When infrastructure folks talk backups, it's generally that point in time and maybe once a day. And then the next day, you go and do it again. And there's no in-between in there. So what you end up with is the potential to lose a ton of data. Now we have to figure out the nuances of what's actually allowable from an Azure SQL data platform. So we're going to start at Azure SQL Managed Instance. So take that SQL Server, literally get rid of the ability to touch the operating system. You can't get to the instance, but you can connect to the database. Pretty straightforward. It's locked down, but honestly, if this is all you need, why manage patching an operating system? Why deal with all this stuff? Just use it. It works. The recovery options for native backups are, quote, built in. You have a point-in-time recovery option to go back a couple of weeks, and you pick down to the minute, and that's about as far as you go. Okay? Not the most flexible, but this is kind of the trade-offs with that platform, at least for the native options. Can we take an archival backup of it? You can export to a backpack, but how do you refresh this to a lower tier for testing? How do we move data around if we need a local copy on a laptop to play with or something like that? And it just gets a little more interesting. Now, when we talk platform as a service, or in this case, Azure SQL Managed Instance, again, throw away the ability to get to the operating system, but you now have the instance. So what that really gives us is more than one database, which for a lot of applications we need. So it's very, very critical. But again, we don't have the OS. So what do? The backup or recovery options, in theory, are built in. You can do a copy-only backup directly to Azure Blob Storage. You can then take that database and restore it in other places, like another managed instance for a local copy. Or if you're on SQL Server 2022 in a virtual machine, you can then back up and recover that thing to a local instance. But it's a different process. It's kind of a challenge. Or we've got a virtual machine. Quite frankly, it's business as usual at this point. You get, one or more instances, you get whatever databases you need on there. Recovery options are, quote, built in. Same kind of thing. You can do a virtual machine level backup. You can deal with your SQL Server backups however you want to do it, but you've still got to worry about the nuances with all of these components. The database availability side gets interesting. If you're just relying on native backups, they may back the stuff up once a day, every 8 hours, something like that. Those SLAs that I told you about, if something melts down, are their backup tools in frequency good enough to actually meet your organization SLAs? So the goals of any data stack, one, we have to meet the SLAs or exceed them. But bottom line, we got to minimize the amount of data loss upon a system failure. And we have to minimize the downtime if a problem actually creeps up. We have to factor in these database transaction log backups. And I can be frank, not all backup solutions do this. Most of them are just point in time. It's not the most fun. Your options do vary by which platform you're on. But as a DBA, we need the ability to recover to points in between. It really adds up. Bottom line, we got to protect the data, protect the availability, keep this thing running fast in that order. So when we're on database as a service, or really anything in Azure that's as a service, we can select on a map and replicate to a different region. It may not be up to the point in time that we want, but you do have some options. There are some export mechanisms with backpacks, but what are we going to do? Again, it all goes back to those SLAs. You can't really pick a lot of these options until you have those defined. And if you don't, you're throwing darts at a dartboard and guessing, and when the poop hits a fan, you've never built it good enough. Now, here's the interesting part. We can complement what SQL Server gives us if we're in a virtual machine based on the availability features. So for any systems folks out there, talk to your DBAs because they may be using some advanced SQL Server level availability features. They may not have told you this, and it changes up how you're going to back up and recover these things. So just an example, the flagship availability solution out there is a SQL Server availability group. You may hear the marketing term always on. That's not the feature, that's just a marketing buzzword. In this case, let's have 3 SQL servers, 2 of them at one data center, the third one at a different data center. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple of databases here. We're going to define an availability group. And it just simply means we have our recoverability options defined for all those databases. And if they need to fail over to anything, they fail over as a set. So they're all running on A. Life is good. We are now synchronously replicating them to B. So if A just dies, guess what? You've got no data loss. Your recovery option is quick. It's like 5 to 10 second failover, and away you go. For DR, we're going to asynchronously push this as fast as we can to a DR facility, and our PO is going to be low, or our TO is going to be even lower. Now, the fun part, what do we actually need for this thing? And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir since we're all on the webinar. If you look at all those options, I need something that is aware of the platform. And I need something that's aware of the limitations of whatever platform you pick, and they all have limitations. I need a time for point-in-time recoverability to not just meet, but exceed those SLAs. I need to get the stuff up and running right now. I need the ability to scan if there are security challenges, because given the state of the world lately, this stuff is everywhere, and we got to protect and recover from it. I need a platform that works for both DBAs with all the nuances we just talked about, and that works for all the system administrators out there. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to Kellyanne.
Thank you, David, for setting up that context. So the solution for Azure SQL, we provide the support for securing the databases running on SQL Server on Azure VM, Azure SQL managed instances, as well as Azure SQL databases. So let's talk about this solution in detail. So basically, the solution for backing up Azure SQL databases and managed instances comprises of 2 components. So the first component is the backups for performing point-in-time restores. So these are typically your log backups you would want to quickly restore. We allow you to retain these backups for up to 35 days. So this is the one component, the PITR backups. The other component is the LTR backups, which you use for retaining them for longer periods of time. It could be compliance reasons, legal reasons, right? So, or for disaster recovery purposes. So these are the backups that we also support, and we allow flexible schedules for taking such backups. You could take them hourly, daily, weekly, so on and so forth. We allow you to retain them for up to 10 years. And one of the interesting aspects of this long-term retention backups that we provide is that these backups are actually stored in an air-gapped manner. They're actually not co-located with the SQL Server that produces these backups. And they're also stored in a space-efficient format. So we dedupe the contents of the backup, we compress them before storing them, so you get the cost advantage for storing them on a long-term basis. And you also have the air gappedness. So in a way, we like to call them as persistent backups, right? And also the other aspect is they are immutable. Okay, so once the backup is generated, not even Rubrik, not even our code can modify them, right? So they are there forever. So those are immutable backups. They are air-gapped and stored efficiently. So those are the long-term retention backups. So before we move on, let's first also understand what is the importance of these persistent backups, right? So essentially, these are useful because whenever the SQL Server is removed, because remember, these backups are going to stay on for a longer period of time. So anything can happen during the time, right? So SQL Server can be compromised or can be accidentally deleted. You don't want to lose those snapshots, okay? So that's one main reason for that. Plus, you would want to also take these backups at a flexible schedule, because that depends on your organization or your legal compliance. You might want to take them weekly or monthly or whatever, and you want to retain them more flexibly. So at this point of time, Azure does not provide that kind of flexibility in terms of retaining these backups. So we allow up to 10 years of retention for these backups, right? And we also provide this feature where you could take these backups on demand, right? So in case if you're going to pursue any major task like migrations or anything else that you see expensive, before you do that, anything riskier, before you do that risky operation, we just trigger an on-demand backup, right? So we save that. And lastly, we also allow these backups to be restored across SQL servers. Okay, so for example, you've taken a backup against server one, you could restore that onto a server two, and that server two can be running in a different region, different Azure subscription, no problem. We will let you restore from that backup. Okay. In fact, the next slide talks a bit more on that. So in terms of all the capabilities that we offer for restoring these files, so like I said, we could do cross-region, cross-subscription restores. We will also let you download that backup, literally just download that backup onto your local machine in the backpack format. Okay. So that's something that we also support. So the reason we allow you to download these long-term retention backups in the backpack format is because basically we ourselves store them as backpack format in the backend. Okay, so let's talk briefly about what are these backpack files. So I'm sure most of you know this. Backpack files are essentially SQL Server database exports. They're basically a zip file, which consists of the schema definitions captured as XML files and the table data captured as BCP files, right? So zip them up and you get a backpack, basically. Before we talk about the disadvantages of this format, which is very relevant to our discussion, let me touch upon why did we choose to use backpack files for storing long-term retention backups. Okay, so firstly, backpack files are highly portable. Okay, so you can basically restore it. You can actually take a backup from one particular version of SQL Server and then restore it onto a different version or a different variant of it. Like we've had customers where they've taken a backup on an MI and they were able to restore that onto an Azure SQL database, right? So this is possible. So it gives us very good level of portability. Plus, these are lighter weight backups, right? So they don't contain the system data. They only contain the user data, and the two they are compressed. So depending on the data representing, contents of your database, your compression ratios can vary between 10 to 50% of the native backups. That's great because we get to store them already in an efficient manner. Plus, there are tools and frameworks that have been around both from the open source as well as from Microsoft for interacting with these backpack files. Okay, so these are all the benefits that we choose the backpack files for. But the disadvantages of this, and I'm sure most of you already know this, producing these backpack files is time consuming. Okay, so there are utilities to produce them depending on the database size. It can take a couple of hours or many hours. So we within Rubrik are continuously innovating on that front, trying to bring down those latencies. So that's one thing that we were already working on. The other aspect is the transactional consistency guarantee, which is we know that when we are exporting the backpack files from a database, we're not going to be pausing anything on the user transactions, right? So user transactions continue to happen, and we're going to basically take the backpack out. So during the time, given that backpack files are generated at a certain isolation level, which we're going to talk about, it can lead to phantom reads, okay? So as a result, they're not always guaranteed to be transactionally consistent, and that's a major problem. So how do you call a backpack file a backup if that does not contain all the transactions, right? So let's see how do we solve that. So before we move on, this is just a slide which talks about basically why does transactional consistency guarantee is not honored by backpack files, because backpack files are generated at the read committed isolation level, and they are known to sometimes cause phantom reads, and phantom records may be inserted into these backpack files. Okay, so that's a problem. So how do we solve that? So CDC. So the trick for that is to basically use change data capture a well-known technology within SQL Server, which lets us access the transaction log. So the idea is to basically get all the transactions which have occurred during the time that we were generating the backpack and basically apply these transactions onto that backpack file. So we've come up with an algorithm to be able to do that, and that guarantees transactional consistency for these backpack files. And now they're worth calling a backup, so to speak, right? So we make use of CDC to be able to do this, and as a result, it involves a bit of setup, which Chris is going to talk about in his demo. But before that, so basically, briefly, what we need are credentials for us to be able to take the backpack out of your database. So these credentials can be non-admin. We just need requisite permissions for us to be able to extract that backpack and read the CDC data out. Okay. So we also have support for Azure AD integration as well, and a master wizard based flow to help you get going with all the setup. So now I'm going to hand over to Chris to walk us through all these aspects in a demo. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, so I have recorded a video that walks us through all the components that we're going to cover today. Did a video of it because a lot of the things like doing a restore of a database takes a lot of time, and I don't want to waste a lot of time watching a restore happen, so we speed up the video in those certain spots. So in this case, we're going to start off with the main dashboard of Rubrik Security Cloud, or RSC. And to begin our demo, we're going to first cover what an SLA domain is in RSC. This first page is a list of all the SLA domains that I have in my environment already configured. And this list of SLA domains can cover all different types of workloads, which we'll see on the next screen. But we're going to go through creating an SLA domain first. And as you can see, the workloads that are there, some are more traditional, with them being VMs or databases or file sets. And then we also have some cloud native objects like Azure SQL Database or Managed Instance. We can even cover AWS RDS if that was needed. Now, once we select our workloads, we then start to present it with the basics of what an SLA domain is. The first column about take snapshots is all about the frequency of your backups. The second column for retain snapshots is how long do you keep it before it's deleted. And if further frequencies are needed, you can just open up the Show More button and see additional frequencies that are required there. You also have the ability to set a snapshot window or a backup time that the backup will happen. And this will tell RSC to run the backups of the environment specifically in those times, not outside of them. With Azure SQL, the log backups are controlled by the platform itself. So you can't control the frequency, that's already handled by Azure, but you can control the retention of those log backups to state that you want them deleted after a certain period of time. Lastly, give your SLA domain a name and give it a good description so this way it means something to you. Now, as we go forward, now we want to go ahead and see how, now that we've created our SLA domain, we actually want to start applying it to those different types of objects. So we're going to start with Azure SQL databases because it's going to be the same for Azure SQL databases as it is for managed instances. And here we have this list of databases that are there, and we've got those by first connecting RSC to our Azure subscription. And we did that based on just doing a quick connection. There's a wizard you can run that will connect it to the Azure subscription. And once you do that, we can start to see all of the databases that are in that subscription. As you can see, we can see the subscription ID, and you'll notice that there's we have in this SLA column a SLA domain assigned here. Think of this like a blanket. Anything in this subscription will now automatically inherit this policy. So now you can have a blanket over the top of every object you create inside of that subscription that automatically gets that particular backup policy. And then further, you can go into resource groups and get more granular and say everything in this resource group gets this particular policy. And you can see that in the SLA domain column, where we can override that. Then you can go to the server and assign a policy over the server itself, which will override what you set at the resource group, which will override what you set at the subscription level. And then also you have the ability to do tag rules. And a lot of companies are starting to use tags more and more in their Azure environments. And this now says, if this instance has this tag, apply this SLA domain. And the most granular way to apply an SLA domain is actually at the database level. And as you can see here, if you look in the SLA column field and you look at the assignment field, you'll notice that I have an SLA domain there. And in the assignment column, it tells you where we got the SLA domain from. I either got it from the account, or I got it from the resource group, or I got it from the database itself. All depends on where I want those things applied and how I want them inherited. Now, when you go over to a managed instance, it's the same. We start off with the subscription. We connect managed instance to, we connect the RSC to the subscription, pull all the subscriptions in, pull all the managed instances in from this point. And again, we can apply the policy at the subscription level, so everything underneath that subscription gets that particular SLA. We can do the same thing at the resource group level and apply a policy specific to a resource group. We can also build tag rules based on tags that we have in the environment. And we can apply a policy at the instance level, so everything underneath that instance inherits that policy. And then we can also be specific enough at the database level and say, hey, this database gets this particular policy, which overrides all the other previous levels that we've already covered. Now, once we've done this, now we want to start to talk about recovery, because the SLA domain is going to handle all of the backups. It's going to handle taking those backups based on your SLA domain. So if you did an SLA that starts at 1, ends at 3, then we're going to go ahead and make sure backups are taken during that time slot. And your log backups are going to be handled automatically by the Azure platform, and then Rubrik will just make sure that they are deleted after the certain amount of days. So from a recovery perspective, we're going to first see things based on a calendar view. The line along the day denotes that we have log backups. So we can do full point-in-time recovery. And I can select any point in time on this database to do recovery from. And I just hit recover, and then I'm presented with some options. The database name has to be unique, because you cannot do an in-place recovery with Azure. You have to export it out to a new name. So we force it to be a new name, but you can change the name. And then you can also put it to a different managed instance if that was appropriate, or you can go to the same one. Then Rubrik will go ahead and kick the job off, and this is where I sped things up to make it a little bit quicker. And we go ahead and do the export to that new database that we just created. We're going to do another one, though, and this is going to be from the snapshot. Now, the snapshot is denoted by a little camera icon above the timeline. This is your long-term retention backup. So we're going to do the same exact process. Pick that, go to hit recover, and then we're going to have two different options here: recover to database or upload to backpack file. We'll cover upload to backpack file later. We need authentication into the database, so I'm going to choose for this demo SQL authentication, but I could use Azure AD if I wanted to. And then we're going to move forward into the recovery options. Again, same concept. Database name has to be unique, so we force it unique, but we're going to change it to what we want. I have to give my credentials to be able to do the recovery, but then I have the ability to pick what subscription do I want to recover this database into? What region do I want to recover this into? What managed instance do I want to recover this database into? All of those are fully open to me, all done through these drop-downs, and then I can start doing my recovery. And then once you kick off the recovery, the recovery kicks off into that environment. Now, the next type of recovery we're going to do is going to be from a backpack file. This is where we're going to do that upload to backpack option. So we're going to use the snapshot again, that long-term recovery option, but in this case, use upload to backpack file. And then here, we're going to be asked what subscription and storage account we want to send this backpack file to. And this is important. We want to make sure we send it to a place that we have access to. And then once we click that and hit export, Rubrik will go ahead and create that backpack file and stick it into that service account, waiting for you to download. Now this takes a few minutes for it to run through, so again, I've sped it up. But here we end up with a link to a storage account that is in your subscription. So it's because the storage account is in your subscription, the link takes you there. And then we can go ahead and download it to your machine. Now, I already did that, so we wouldn't have to wait for it. But here you can see on my managed instance, I already have the database there, the one I recovered via the snapshot and the one I recovered via the log backup. Now I'm going to go ahead and deploy this backpack file back to my managed instance. This is a backpack file that I've downloaded to my machine, and I'm going to recover it back up to my managed instance. So I'm going to use the standard SSMS or Azure Data Studio wizard to deploy this backpack file. And here I'm just going to go ahead and say create database from backpack file, pick the file location of my backpack file, and give it a database name. Again, you have to give it something meaningful. Obviously, you can't use the database that already exists, but you can go ahead and in this case, we're going to use with or via the backpack. And then this will run for several minutes while it creates that database. And then we'll have a new database on this managed instance that we can go ahead and use. So once we refresh this, now we'll start to see the database, the tables, and everything is all there, already built out for us through that backpack file. Now, what's nice about this process as well is because this is a backpack file, we also have the ability to take this file and put it to a SQL Server on-premise that is less than the version of SQL that's in Azure, which is not normal. Because if you take a backup of a database in Azure, your backup is always at the most recent version of SQL Server, and you can't take a backup there and bring it local because it's always higher than what you have on-prem, unless you have SQL 2022. But what if you don't have 2022? What if you only have SQL 2019? What if you have something lower? Well, that's where the backpack file can come in again. Because now you can take that same exact backpack file that I just downloaded from my Azure SQL Managed instance, and I can go ahead and deploy it to my 2019 instance with the same workflow that I used to deploy it to a managed instance. I'm going to give it the same name via the backpack, and then once this finishes, we'll then have a database on this on-premise SQL Server that was built off of a database sitting in Azure SQL Managed instance. That'll take a couple seconds, and then we'll refresh. And then we can see the database there with the tables and schemas already built out. So that covers, at a very, very high level, and a very fast-paced demo of what we can do with Azure SQL, from protection all the way through the recovery. Definitely, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A panel, and we can go over them with you. Keith?
Thanks. Great presentation, Chris. We always love demos. So we're going to get back to live here, and we are going to move along. Okay. So there we are. Wrap up. We can see that there. Any additional information to add to that particular slide from anyone here?
Yeah, bottom line, backing up your data is always interesting, no matter what platform you're on. The biggest thing is that your business depends on it. So you have to do it right, and do it right. Simple as that.
Absolutely. Upcoming innovation plans. This might be something for Chris or for Callian.
Yes, I can take that. So basically, like I mentioned, we are continuously innovating on bringing down the latencies involved while taking the backpack files, while extracting backpack files, and as well, both during backups as well as restore times. So that's one thing that's coming. Plus, we're also rolling out a suite of security products for ensuring that there is no compromise that has happened to your backups, ransomware detection, and any sort of vulnerabilities have not creeped into these backups. We provide continuous security scans for them. So that's a product that's coming out in a few months' time. And yeah, I mean, these are some of the big ones, right, in the pipeline.
Always new stuff, coming from Rubrik. Great. I'll tell you what. So I think that will bring us to the Q&A. We have a super engaged audience today. Lots and lots of questions. So we're gonna be able to get to a number of them. And this will be for whoever wants to answer it, and more than one of you if you feel like you're you want to add some more. So here's one. What are the prerequisites to migrate SQL Server to Azure SQL database using DMS? That's an interesting one.
Oh boy. Prereqs, number one, make sure whatever third-party vendors that you are using will actually support it. I know that sounds kind of basic, but you would be amazed at the number of vendors that have not yet certified for platform or their platforms for use with databases as a service. Otherwise, it becomes at that point, how much bandwidth do you have? How much data do you need to replicate? What are your performance characteristics? And is the SQL database side actually going to be able to handle all of that? And if so, you'll need a network route to get there. You'll need the appropriate permissions on the SQL Server side in order to be able to retrieve that data, get in line with the data changes, and actually pump that and keep it in sync. But otherwise, it should be pretty straightforward. Now, I know that sounds like a loaded statement. Everybody's organization is different. Every security policy is different. So you may end up with some quirks just trying to get the end-to-end communication to work. But once you get through that, the rest is pretty straightforward.
So for Chris or Callian, do you have anything you want to contribute to what David just said? He gave a really nice summary, I think.
He did, and I don't know that there's much more you can add to that, since it kind of covers pretty much everything you need to do. But yeah, just definitely reiterating on, will your database be supported if it's sitting in a different platform? I know as a DBA doing migrations over the years, I was kind of forced to not be able to migrate off of certain versions of SQL Server simply because the vendor said, no, we can't work with SQL 2000X. We have to keep on SQL 2000 or SQL 2005. And that really hurt a lot of DBAs over the years because they were forced to keep an old, unsupported version of SQL Server still in their environment that they can't get rid of.
We have somebody right now running a SQL Server 6.5 machine in production.
Oof.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, how many attacks are still going on against unpatched servers for which patches have been available for a decade? I mean, it still, happens in this day and age. Okay, Matt has an interesting question. Are you able to create retention policies based on file type or application?
So if you create an SLA domain, you can apply that SLA domain to different types of workloads, one of them being a file set backup. And you could apply that SLA domain to just files based on extension or files based on a location. And the SLA domain will just snapshot those files and then store them based on whatever that file set definition is.
Okay. Okay, Peter wants to know, could a DBA back up an on-premises database and restore it in Azure, a platform as a service instance, for example? Is that possible?
So a managed instance, yes. That one is pretty straightforward. You would essentially back it up locally, copy it up to Azure Blob, issue the command to actually do the restore into the Azure managed instance, and away you go. Yeah, now that's straightforward. Now, getting it out of there back to a boxed SQL Server product, you would need to be on SQL Server 2022 in order to make that work. So that's the only caveat that I've got there. Most of the time, once you go in, you probably don't need to go the other way, but just throwing that out there just in case.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is one probably more for Callian or Chris. Matt Lube wants to know, what is Rubrik's guarantee of backup availability? Something like 11 nines or 9 nines? And what if backup service is not available during a restore? So a couple of questions there.
Right, I can take that. So that's an area that we are also continuously improving. At this point of time, we are around 7 nines of availability on the front end platform, which lets you set up those SLA domains, trigger the backups, and trigger the restores. But we are continuously improving there as well. So that's one part. Uh, is there is there another question there, Kit? A sub question
So
there?
what if backup
Um,
service is not available during a restore? What happens?
Right. So if the backup service is not available, which is basically the Rubrik solution, then essentially you will not be able to do the restores, right? But you will still be able to take the backups because the backups are controlled by the SLA domain that you set up, and they get continuously taken, right? That has nothing to do with the platform itself. But our platform, when if it's down, then you'll not be able to take the restores. That's the only caveat, and that is something, like I said, we are improving on that measure as well. Chris, is there anything that you want to add on that?
So yeah, I have to give the it depends because part of that is also going to be what's the point in time you're recovering back to, because remember that the Azure is going to take backups automatically of the databases through the platform, through those continuous log backups that are happening. So, depending on how far back you need to go, yeah, you may not be able to do a restore via the Rubrik taken long term retention backups. But if Rubrik is down, but you just need to do a restore back to something in the last few minutes or something that you still have inside of Azure, you can generally do the restore through the Azure portal.
Gotcha. Okay, Bradford wants to know, does Rubrik auto-discover all instances, databases, and clusters on each SQL Server?
Yes. So when if it's a SQL Server VM and you add the SQL Server VM into Rubrik, we will automatically discover every single instance that's on that particular host, and then we'll also discover the databases that are under each individual instance. And then going forward, as you add databases to those instances, we automatically discover the newly created databases. If you've applied protection on already, we will automatically protect those newly created databases as they are added. Same thing applies to databases that are created in the Azure Platform as a Service area, where if you add a database to a managed instance or anywhere else, then we're going to automatically protect it once we've discovered that particular object.
Gotcha. David, here's a good one for you, I think. Matt wants to know, how often do you recommend testing restores from the stored backup media?
That's a great question. Bottom line, how well do you want to sleep at night each week?
That's the right answer.
Yeah. Me personally, I prefer to actually do restore tests on a regular basis. I would say on a monthly basis if you're doing them manually. But hey, this is 21st century. Why do them manually? You can do this in a programmatic fashion. And in that scenario, I would say test them weekly because there's no extra time involved. So why not?
And honestly, I've said this many, many times to customer calls and also in conversations with David. It doesn't matter what vendor you use or what tool you use to do a backup. If you're not testing those backups, you don't have a backup.
Right. If you're not testing your backups, you have a very expensive space heater.
And do you still find, David, that you're shocked at this point how often people do not test their backups? Is this still something we're talking about in 2023 now, right?
Daily. It is. I can comfortably tell you the number of companies that routinely test their database backups outside of periodic restores for, say, month-end refreshes. It's less than 10%. And I know that sounds absolutely catastrophic for me to say, but that's the reality. And it's hard because most of the time, if you don't test it, you don't know it's bad until you go to do a recovery. And at that point, it's game over. And quite frankly, that's a resume generating event for everybody.
Right, right. And yeah, absolutely. So, Mohammed has a question. It's the kind of thing that's on everyone's mind these days, and this is about AI. And he wants to know how AI has impacted Azure SQL data, and if it does, how will that affect security considerations?
Ooh, that's a deep question. It's really interesting. Most of the time, I'm I'm honestly hoping that AI continues to improve more because you can ask AI to give me a better data model for something, and therefore we may be able to make wherever the data lands more efficient. Now, on the security standpoint, I honestly haven't spent much time thinking about AI and Azure SQL data security, but what it tells me is that I need to start thinking about that actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so one thing I just want to add on that point is that as part of the security services that we're going to be rolling out in the future, we're actually also incorporating AI, machine learning powered, detection of ransomware, right? So ransomware signatures, as well as probability of whether that's a ransomware signature or not, is something that is powered by a machine learning model. And similar, suite of products are coming in the security space. So, keep watching out.
For sure. Okay, so Callie, this might be for you, and then for Chris, if he wants to weigh in. And this refers back to Backpack, which you were talking about before. Michael wants to know, are there any deduplication options associated with Backpack or standard backups?
Right. So, in terms of deduplication, the solution currently retrieves the backpack from the SQL Server, and it performs content deduplication behind the scenes. So we have algorithms which determine what has changed from the previous backup, from the previous backpack to be specific, and only take those changes and save them in a compressed manner. So that is something that we provide out of the box. So that's one kind of deduplication we do. So in a way, if you think about that, basically it's incremental forever. So although we take the entire backpack every time from the SQL Server, we only store the delta onto the storage media, thus saving you costs.
Okay. Last question, I think, and then we got to start wrapping this up. This has been so much fun. Peter wants to know, and this is kind of a C-level question. My company doesn't want to invest in an off-site storage solution, and we only retain 30 days worth of backups as policy. So how can Peter convince senior leadership that off-site storage for backups is worth the cost? Now, this is probably a question that Rubrik gets a lot.
Let me start with this one, though. For everybody on this call, all you got to do is just go back in the presentation and take a look at the two tornado photos. That one, the second photo, quite literally lifted off the ground, continued towards my house, and went directly overhead. That can happen to you. That can happen to your organization. Could be a hurricane, could be a blizzard, could be a lightning strike that can happen anywhere. It can be anything. If you don't have offsite backups and that system melts down, bye-bye.
All right. What's the cost of losing your data? And I mean, that's another way to look at it. You can look at the upfront costs, or you can look at the costs when a disaster does strike, right? I mean, that's, it's not as simple as it seems. Can we afford it now? Well, can you afford, for this worst case scenario to happen, it seems to me.
Yeah. Well, bottom line, what's your business valuation? Because that's what's going up in smoke if you lose the data. And I hate to say it, you can replace staff, you can replace the building, you can replace product. But if you don't know who you're selling your product to, or who owes you money for receiving the product, or the blueprints for producing the product, what else do you have?
Exactly.
Just think about all the articles that are in the news about every single industry being hit by ransomware. And it's, if you think your company is not important enough, why would a ransomware or hacker hit a local school in North Carolina? Like, they're going after everybody, not just
Right.
the big Microsofts of the world. They're going
It's
after everybody.
indiscriminate. Yeah, it's indiscriminate. They'll go after anybody because it's a moneymaker for them.
Yep.
Right. And when you're talking about things like ransomware, the costs aren't only financial, but they're also reputational, and and that can be absolutely devastating as well. Well, gentlemen, that wraps up all of our time for today. I thank you so much, Callian, David, and Chris, for being on and for the great presentation and all the insights in the Q&A. We really appreciate your time and wisdom and all the information you imparted on us. So thanks again. It was really a delight to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that leaves just little old me here today for the rest of this. We are about done, but we do have one final thing that we need to do today. And in case you were thinking I forgot, I didn't. That is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. For $250. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win the prize. And we do have a winner now for today. The winner of that Amazon gift card is Aaron Citron from Pennsylvania. Congratulations to you, Aaron. We will be in touch with you very soon to get you your card. And with that, we're wrapped, everyone. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. I want to thank all of you attendees for being here, for spending part of your day with us, and for your engagement. There were so many great questions. This is something that obviously has struck a nerve that everybody wants to know about, and I think we got a lot more information. We're much more knowledgeable now than we were before this started. And that's really what we want for you. It's always what I want for me too. So thanks again for attending, and thanks for your questions. That concludes the event now. Have a great rest of your day.